Under the blistering glare of the New Mexico sun, Helena Jones drove the fence post into the parched earth with all the strength her weary body could muster. Sweat traced slow rivers down her spine, dampening the collar of her worn cotton shirt and stinging the raw blisters on her hands. Hands that had once turned pages, not wielded tools. It had been 6 long months since Richard died, and the ranch, like her spirit, was splintering at the edges. The land groaned with neglect, and every cracked board and sagging gate whispered a cruel truth. She was alone now, clinging to the remnants of her brother's dream, with nothing but grit and grief to guide her. "Come on," she muttered through gritted teeth, driving the post deeper into the unforgiving soil. The mallet slipped in her grip, and she stumbled forward, scraping her knee against the rough wood. A quiet curse escaped her lips as she straightened, wiping dirt from her brow with the back of her hand. The vast expanse of the Jones Ranch stretched before her, hundreds of acres of arid land, dotted with scrubby vegetation and the occasional hardy tree. In the distance, the cattle grazed listlessly, their numbers dwindling with each passing month. Without Richard's strength and knowledge, Helena was fighting a losing battle against the elements, the isolation, and her own limitations. As the afternoon wore on, Helena felt the familiar ache of exhaustion settling into her bones. She gathered her tools and began the long walk back to the modest cabin that served as both home and painful reminder of all she had lost. The setting sun painted the landscape in hues of orange and gold, a beauty that went unappreciated by eyes too weary to see beyond survival. She was halfway to the cabin when she felt it, the prickling sensation of being watched. Helena froze, her hand instinctively moving to the small revolver tucked into her belt. Years on the frontier had taught her to trust her instincts. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice steady despite the fear clutching at her throat. "Show yourself." Silence answered her, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Then, a slight movement caught her eye, a shadow detaching itself from the rocks to her right. A man emerged, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. Helena's fingers tightened around the revolver's grip as she assessed the stranger. He was tall and lean, his copper skin marked with the telltale signs of his heritage. An Apache warrior, dressed in a curious blend of traditional garments and white man's clothing. A rifle hung across his back, but his hands remained open at his sides, non-threatening, yet alert. "Stay back," Helena warned, drawing her weapon. "This is private property." The man stopped, regarding her with dark, unfathomable eyes. When he spoke, his voice was deep and measured, his English accented but clear. "I mean no harm, Miss Jones. I have come because of a promise." Helena stiffened. "How do you know my name?" "Your brother spoke of you often." The Apache's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I am called Onas. Richard Jones saved my life 2 summers ago when soldiers attacked my people without provocation. He stood between their rifles and my fallen body." The mention of her brother sent a fresh wave of grief through Helena. She lowered the gun slightly, memories flooding back, Richard's letters speaking of the injustices he'd witnessed, his growing friendship with a young Apache warrior whose life he'd saved. "Your brother saved my life," the Apache warrior said. "Now I have returned to save yours." Helena's jaw tightened. "I don't need saving. The winter approaches. The fences are broken. Your cattle grow thin." Onas stated these facts without judgment, but Helena felt them like blows. "Before he died, Richard made me promise to protect his sister. I have come to fulfill this oath." "My brother had no right to make such a promise," Helena replied coldly, "and you have no obligation to keep it. I can manage my own affairs." Onas studied her for a long moment. "As you wish, but I will remain nearby. When you need help, you need only call." "I won't be calling," she said firmly. "Now please leave my property." The Apache nodded once, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the gathering dusk as silently as he had appeared. Helena watched until she could no longer see him, an unsettling mixture of anger and relief washing over her. How dare Richard make such arrangements without consulting her? And how dare this stranger presume she needed his protection? Yet, as she continued toward the cabin, she couldn't help glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see Onas watching from the shadows. The land seemed somehow less empty now, though whether that was comforting or disturbing, Helena couldn't decide. Inside the cabin, she lit the oil lamp and moved mechanically through her evening routine, washing the day's dirt from her skin, preparing a meager supper from dwindling supplies, checking and rechecking the locks on the doors and windows. The small home that had once been filled with Richard's laughter and their shared dreams now echoed with emptiness. As she sat alone at the rough-hewn table, Helena's eyes drifted to the corner where Richard's old rifle stood, the same rifle he had used to defend Onas from the soldiers, according to the Apache's story. Her brother had always been too trusting, too willing to see the good in others. It had gotten him involved in that skirmish, and ultimately, those wounds had festered and taken his life. Helena wouldn't make the same mistake. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, not when survival demanded vigilance, especially not trust in a stranger who appeared from nowhere, claiming friendship with her dead brother. Yet, as she prepared for bed, Helena couldn't shake the image of Onas's steady gaze, the quiet dignity with which he had accepted her rejection. Despite herself, she wondered if he was out there in the darkness, keeping his promise to a man who could no longer hold him to it. "I don't need your help," she whispered to the night, but the creaking of the old cabin in the wind seemed to mock her certainty. Morning came too soon, streaming through the worn curtains and rousing Helena from fitful sleep. Her dreams had been troubled, visions of Richard, of the Apache warrior, of the ranch crumbling to dust around her. She rose stiffly, her body protesting yesterday's labor as she dressed and prepared to face another day of endless work. The first sign that something was wrong came when she stepped onto the porch and saw the corral gate swinging open. Panic surged through her as she ran toward it, scanning the empty enclosure. "Sirocco!" she called, searching frantically for her prized mare, the one link to her former life, a gift from her father years ago. Without the horse, managing the ranch would be nearly impossible. "Sirocco!" Only silence answered, punctuated by the distant lowing of cattle. Helena leaned against the corral fence, despair threatening to overwhelm her. This was the final blow. Without Sirocco, she might as well abandon the ranch entirely. A sound drew her attention, hoofbeats approaching from the east. Helena straightened, hope and wariness warring within her, as she shielded her eyes against the rising sun. A rider appeared on the horizon, leading a second horse. Helena's heart leaped as she recognized Sirocco's distinctive white blaze. The rider drew closer, and Helena's breath caught as she realized it was Onas, sitting tall and straight on a dappled grey stallion, guiding Sirocco with gentle hands. He brought the horses to a halt before her, sliding effortlessly to the ground. "Your mare wandered far," he said, offering the reins. She was heading toward the creek beyond the northern boundary. Helena accepted the reins with trembling fingers. "Thank you," she managed, her pride warring with genuine gratitude. Sirocco nudged her shoulder affectionately, and Helena stroked the mare's neck, relief washing through her. "The corral gate was broken," Onas observed, running his hand along the splintered wood. "The hinge has pulled away from the post." "I can fix it," Helena said quickly, defensiveness creeping back into her voice. Onas nodded. "Yes, but it would go faster with 2 sets of hands." He met her gaze steadily. "I ask for nothing in return, only to keep my word to your brother." Helena hesitated, torn between necessity and pride. The ranch was too much for one person. She had known this for months, but refused to admit it. Now, faced with Onas's quiet offer and the memory of last night's despair, she found her resistance wavering. "Just the corral," she said finally. "Then we'll discuss other repairs." A hint of a smile touched Onas's lips. "As you wish, Miss Jones." And so began an uneasy alliance between the grieving rancher's sister and the Apache warrior, bound by a promise to the dead. Neither could have imagined how this reluctant partnership would transform them both, or how the harsh New Mexico landscape would witness the slow blooming of something neither dared name. The next few days established a cautious routine. Onas arrived at dawn, worked alongside Helena until sunset, then departed to wherever he made his camp. Helena never asked, and he never volunteered the information. Their conversations remained sparse and practical, focused on repairs, the weather, the livestock. Yet Helena found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, the practiced efficiency of his movements, the quiet respect with which he treated the animals, the surprising gentleness of his calloused hands when tending to a lame calf. Otas was a man of contradictions, carrying himself with the dignified bearing of a warrior while displaying the patience of a craftsman when repairing the sagging roof or reinforcing the windmill. A week into their arrangement, Helena's curiosity finally overcame her reserve. They were mending the chicken coop, working side by side in the afternoon shade. "How did you meet my brother?" she asked, keeping her eyes on her work. Onas continued securing a wire mesh panel before answering. "It was during a raid. The soldiers came to our camp without warning. They claimed we had stolen cattle, but this was not true." His voice remained neutral, though Helena sensed the controlled anger beneath. "I was shot protecting the children. I fell, and the soldier prepared to finish me. Then Richard appeared." Helena glanced at him surprised. "My brother interfered with a military operation?" "Your brother recognized injustice," Onas corrected gently. "He stepped between me and the rifle, told the soldier that killing an unarmed man would bring shame to his uniform." A rare smile briefly transformed Onas's face. The soldier hesitated. "Richard helped me to my feet, took me to safety. Later, he treated my wounds." The image was so vivid, so typically Richard, that Helena felt her throat tighten. "That sounds like him," she admitted, always involving himself in other people's troubles. "After that day, we became as brothers," Onas continued. "I taught him to track, to move silently through the desert. He taught me your language, your ways. When his old wounds from the war began to trouble him again, I brought medicines from my people." "They didn't work," Helena said, more sharply than intended. Onas met her gaze, his eyes reflecting a grief that mirrored her own. "No, the poison was too deep in his blood. But they eased his pain in the final days." Helena looked away, blinking rapidly. "I wasn't here," she whispered. "When he needed me most, I was back east, thinking he was getting better." "He spoke of you constantly," Onas said. "He was proud of your education, your spirit. He wanted to make the ranch prosperous before bringing you here permanently." A silence fell between them, filled with the weight of shared loss. Finally, Helena straightened, gesturing toward the repaired coop. "This should hold now," she said, deliberately changing the subject. "Tomorrow, we should check the north pasture fencing." Onas accepted the shift in conversation with a nod. "The cattle will need to be moved soon. The grass there grows thin." That evening, after Onas had departed, Helena found herself sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the landscape in fiery colors. For the first time since Richard's death, the crushing weight of solitude felt slightly lighter. The ranch was still failing, the future still uncertain, but she was no longer facing it entirely alone. The following morning brought change in the form of uninvited visitors. Helena was in the barn, Onas beside her as they repaired a broken harness, when the sound of approaching horses broke the quiet. "Stay here," Onas said, his posture instantly alert. He moved to the barn door, peering out cautiously. "This is my property," Helena reminded him, following despite his warning. "I'll handle whoever it is." 3 riders approached, dust billowing behind their horses. Helena recognized them immediately, Emmett Blackwood and 2 of his ranch hands. Blackwoods had been trying to buy the Jones property since before Richard's death, his offers growing increasingly less generous as Helena's situation deteriorated. "Miss Jones!" Blackwood called as they drew near, tipping his hat with mock politeness. He was a tall man in his 40s, his once handsome face weathered by sun and whiskey. "Lovely day for a visit, wouldn't you say?" Helena stepped forward, conscious of Onas's silent presence behind her. "What do you want, Blackwood?" "Just checking on my investment," he replied, dismounting with a grunt. His gaze shifted to Onas, hardening with instant hostility. "I see you've hired help, scraping the bottom of the barrel, aren't you?" Helena felt rather than saw Onas stiffen. "State your business, or leave," she said coldly. Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I've come to make you another offer for this land. $2,000 cash money, more than generous considering." He gestured vaguely at the dilapidated buildings. "The ranch isn't for sale," Helena replied, the same answer she'd given him every time. "Be reasonable, woman," Blackwood said, his tone losing its veneer of civility. "You can't manage this place alone, and hiring a savage won't change that. The bank will foreclose by winter, and then you'll get nothing." Helena felt heat rising in her cheeks. "Mr. Onas is a guest, not a hired hand, and my finances are none of your concern." Blackwood laughed, an ugly sound. "A guest? Is that what they're calling it these days? His implication hung in the air, crude and deliberate. Before Helena could respond, Onas stepped forward, his movement so fluid it seemed he simply materialized at her side. Though his face remained impassive, something in his stance made Blackwood take an involuntary step back. "Miss Jones has asked you to leave," Onas said quietly. The two ranch hands exchanged uneasy glances, hands drifting toward their holsters. Blackwood recovered quickly, his lip curling. "You'd better watch yourself, Indian. Your kind isn't welcome around here. Folks might start wondering what happened to Richard Jones with his savage friend showing up so convenient-like after his death." Helena gasped, rage surging through her. "How dare you? My brother died of infection from old war wounds. Everyone in the territory knows that." "Do they?" Blackwood's eyes gleamed with malice. "Well, if you change your mind about selling, my offer stands, for now." He remounted his horse, gesturing to his men. "Think carefully, Miss Jones. Winter's coming, and it gets mighty lonely out here." They rode away, leaving a cloud of dust and tension in their wake. Helena's hands trembled with anger as she watched them go. "He will return," Onas observed. "Yes," Helena agreed grimly. "He's been after this land for years. The water rights are valuable. Your brother refused to sell to such a man." Helena glanced at him. "You discussed it?" Onas nodded. "Richard said Blackwood would destroy the land, drive away the native people who hunt here by permission." This was news to Helena. "My brother allowed hunting on our property?" "For my people, yes. In exchange, we kept watch against rustlers and shared knowledge of weather patterns, water sources." Onas hesitated. It was a bond of respect between neighbors. Helena absorbed this information, another piece of her brother's life that had been unknown to her. "I see." They returned to their tasks, but the encounter had cast a shadow over the day. That evening, as they sat on the porch eating a simple supper of beans and cornbread, Helena broke their customary silence. "Blackwood is dangerous," she said. "His threats weren't empty." Onas nodded, his profile sharp against the darkening sky. "Men like him understand only power and fear." "Is that why you stay nearby at night?" Helena asked suddenly. "Have you been guarding the ranch?" A hint of surprise crossed Onas's features. "Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have accepted my protection if I had?" Helena considered this, then shook her head ruefully. "Probably not." Something that might have been amusement flickered in Onas's eyes. "Then you have answered your own question." Later, as Helena prepared for bed, she found herself pausing at the window, looking out into the darkness. Somewhere out there, Onas kept watch, fulfilling his promise to Richard, but perhaps also beginning to fulfill something to her as well. The thought should have unsettled her. Instead, she found it strangely comforting. The following weeks brought a subtle shift in their relationship. The silences between them grew comfortable rather than strained. Helena began to recognize the almost imperceptible changes in Onas's expression that signaled approval, concern, or rare amusement. In turn, she found herself speaking more freely, sharing stories of her childhood with Richard, her time at school in Boston, her dreams for the ranch. Onas proved to be an attentive listener, and when he chose to speak, a thoughtful conversationalist. His observations revealed a keen intelligence and a depth of understanding that challenged Helena's preconceptions. Gradually, she stopped seeing him as the Apache and began to see him simply as Onas, a man of honor, wisdom, and unexpected kindness. The ranch, too, began to transform under their joint efforts. Fences were mended, buildings repaired, livestock tended with increasing care. When Onas suggested traditional Apache methods for conserving water and protecting the soil from erosion, Helena listened and implemented his ideas. Together, they worked from sunrise to sunset, their bodies moving in unconscious harmony, anticipating each other's needs without words. One evening, as they sat beside a small fire outside the cabin, Helena found the courage to ask the question that had been growing in her mind. "Why did you really come back, Onas? Was it only because of your promise to Richard?" Onas gazed into the flames for a long moment before answering. "A promise to a brother is sacred," he said finally. "But there was more. Your brother spoke of you with such love, such pride. He showed me the letters you wrote to him, full of fire and determination." He looked up, meeting her eyes across the fire. "I wanted to know the woman who wrote those words." The simple honesty of his answer caught Helena off guard. Heat rose in her cheeks, and she lowered her gaze, suddenly aware of how close they sat, how the firelight softened Onas's strong features. "And now that you know me," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now I understand why Richard loved you so deeply," Onas replied. "Your strength is not in your muscles, but in your heart." The moment hung between them, fragile and charged with unspoken possibility. Then the wind shifted, sending sparks flying, and the spell was broken. Helena rose, murmuring about the lateness of the hour, and retreated to the safety of the cabin. But that night, as she lay in bed listening to the coyotes call in the distance, Helena acknowledged the truth she had been avoiding. She was falling in love with Onas, a man from a different world, bound to her by nothing more than a promise to her dead brother. A man whose very presence on her property could bring danger to them both in a territory where such relationships were not merely frowned upon, but could be met with violence. Sleep eluded her as she wrestled with these thoughts, unaware that outside, beneath the vast canopy of stars, Onas too was awake, his heart equally troubled by emotions he had not sought, but could no longer deny. The first snow of winter fell in early November, earlier than usual, a warning of the harsh season to come. Helena woke to a world transformed, the familiar landscape softened under a blanket of white. She stood on the porch, breath clouding in the crisp air, and watched Onas approaching through the swirling flakes, a ghostly figure materializing from the whiteness. "The cattle have been moved to the sheltered valley," he reported, stomping snow from his boots before entering the cabin. "The young ones will need extra feed until this passes." Helena nodded, pouring him a cup of coffee. Their hands brushed as she passed it to him, and she felt the now familiar flutter in her chest at the contact. These past weeks, they had been careful to maintain a respectful distance, though the awareness between them had only grown stronger. "Will you show me how to make those snowshoes you mentioned?" she asked, deliberately focusing on practical matters. "If the snow deepens, we'll need them to check the far pastures." Onas's eyes warmed at her use of "we." "Yes." Hai gathered materials yesterday, sensing the storm's approach. They spent the morning by the fire, Onas demonstrating the traditional Apache method of bending wood and stretching rawhide to create functional snowshoes. Helena watched his hands, strong yet dexterous, crafting with patient precision. When it was her turn to try, he guided her movements, his touch light but sure. "Like this," he said, his voice close to her ear as he helped her bend a particularly stubborn branch. Helena nodded, acutely aware of his proximity, the scent of pine and leather that clung to him, the warmth of his body beside hers. The storm intensified throughout the day, wind howling around the cabin's eaves. By mid-afternoon, it was clear that Onas would not be able to return to his camp. "You should stay here tonight," Helena said, trying to sound matter-of-fact. "The barn loft is dry and has extra blankets." Onas studied her face. "That would be wise," he agreed, though something in his expression suggested he understood the significance of the invitation. The first time she had acknowledged his right to shelter on the property he had been helping to restore. As dusk fell, bringing deeper cold, they shared a simple meal of venison stew, meat from a deer Onas had hunted the previous week. The cabin felt different with him inside, smaller yet somehow more like a home than it had since Richard's death. They spoke of practical things, plans for reinforcing the barn before the next storm, strategies for stretching their supplies through winter, the condition of the pregnant cows that would calve in spring. Yet beneath the mundane conversation ran a current of awareness, of questions unasked and feelings unexpressed. When their eyes met across the table, Helena found herself unable to look away, drawn into the quiet depth of Onas's gaze. "I should check on the livestock before retiring," he said finally, breaking the spell. Helena nodded, suddenly awkward. "Of course, I'll prepare the loft." Later, as she lay listening to the storm raging outside, Helena found comfort in knowing Onas was near, separated only by the barn's wall from her cabin. For the first time since returning to the ranch, she felt truly safe. Morning brought a lull in the storm and an unexpected visitor. Helena was clearing a path to the well when the sound of approaching hooves reached her ears. She tensed, remembering Blackwood's threats, but relaxed when she recognized Sheriff Thomas Miller, riding slowly through the snow. "Morning, Miss Jones," the sheriff called, dismounting stiffly. He was an older man, grey-haired and weather-beaten, who had known Richard from their days fighting together in the war. "Checking on folks after this blow. You holding up all right out here?" "We're managing fine, thank you," Helena replied, then realized her slip. I'm managing fine." Miller's sharp eyes missed nothing. "Heard you had company these days." "An Apache fella." Helena straightened. "Onas was my brother's friend. He's been helping with repairs around the ranch." The sheriff's expression revealed nothing. "Might want to be careful there, Miss Jones. Some folks in town are talking. Blackwood's been spreading stories." Heat rose in Helena's cheeks. "What kind of stories?" Miller shifted uncomfortably. "The kind that could cause trouble for a woman alone, suggesting impropriety if you take my meaning." "There's nothing improper about accepting help from a friend of my brother's," Helena said firmly. "You and I know that," Miller agreed, "but folks around here—" He trailed off, then changed tack. "There's another matter. Army Patrol reported increased Apache movement in these parts. Chief Victorio's band, most likely. They're saying your friend might be passing information." Helena's indignation flared. "That's ridiculous. Onas has done nothing but help me save this ranch." "I believe you," Miller said, raising a placating hand. "Known your family too long to think otherwise. But Lieutenant Hayes is new to the territory, eager to make a name for himself. He's been asking questions about your Apache." Before Helena could respond, Onas emerged from the barn, leading her horse. He stopped when he saw the sheriff, his face becoming carefully impassive. "Sheriff Miller," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "Onas." Miller returned the nod, his hand unconsciously moving closer to his holstered pistol. "Been a while. You know each other?" Helena asked, surprised. "The sheriff once prevented a hanging," Onas said simply, "when I was younger and less cautious in town." Miller had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Just doing my job. Law's the law even when folks don't like it." He turned back to Helena. "Anyway, Miss Jones, just wanted to make sure you're all right after the storm, and to warn you, be careful." The implicit warning hung in the air as he remounted and rode away, leaving Helena and Onas standing in the snow, a new tension between them. "What did he mean about Chief Victorio's band?" Helena asked as they watched the sheriff disappear into the swirling whiteness. Onas's face revealed nothing. "Victorio fights for the survival of our people. The reservation they assigned is barren land, no game, poor water. His band left to hunt their ancestral grounds." "And the army pursues them," Helena finished. "Yes." Onas met her gaze steadily. "I am not of Victorio's band. My people, the Mescalero, have chosen a different path. But we are all Apache in the eyes of the army." Helena studied his face, searching for the truth. "Have you been helping them?" "I have not betrayed your trust," Onas replied, neither confirming nor denying the accusation. "But I cannot stand idle while my people suffer." Helena felt torn between understanding and fear, not of Onas, but for him. If the army believed he was aiding Victorio, no promise to her dead brother would protect him. "The sheriff is right," she said finally. "We need to be careful." Onas nodded, something like regret passing across his features. "Perhaps it would be best if I did not stay so close to the ranch. I can continue to help, but from a distance." The suggestion sent a pang through Helena's heart. These past weeks, Onas's presence had become essential to her, not just for the practical help he provided, but for the companionship, the shared purpose, the quiet understanding that had grown between them. "No," she said, surprising herself with her vehemence. "I won't let Blackwood's gossip or the army's suspicions drive you away. This was my brother's home, and he considered you family. You have as much right to be here as I do." Something shifted in Onas's expression, a softening, a warmth that made Helena's heart beat faster. "Your brother would be proud of the woman you have become," he said softly. The moment was interrupted by a distant sound, horses approaching, more than one, moving fast through the snow. Onas's posture changed instantly, alert and wary. "Into the cabin," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Now." Helena hesitated. "Who—" "Go," Onas insisted, already moving toward the barn. "I will join you shortly." Helena hurried to the cabin, her mind racing. Through the window she watched Onas disappear into the barn, emerging moments later with Richard's rifle. He moved swiftly to the cabin, slipping inside and positioning himself by the window. "6 riders," he reported. "Army patrol, led by a lieutenant. They are searching for someone." Helena's throat tightened with fear, not for herself, but for Onas. "They're looking for you." "Perhaps." His expression was grave. "Stay inside, no matter what happens." Before she could protest, he was gone, slipping out the back door and disappearing around the side of the cabin. Helena moved to the window, heart pounding as the patrol drew nearer. She recognized Lieutenant Hayes at the front, a young, ambitious officer who had arrived in the territory only months ago. His reputation for harsh treatment of the native population had preceded him. The patrol halted before the cabin and Hayes dismounted. "Miss Jones," he called, "I need to speak with you." Taking a deep breath, Helena stepped onto the porch, closing the door firmly behind her. "Good morning, Lieutenant. What brings you out in this weather?" Hayes's eyes scanned the property, cold and calculating. "We're tracking a band of renegade Apaches. They raided a settlement 2 days ago, killed 3 men. Helena kept her expression neutral, though her mind raced. 2 days ago, Onas had been with her from dawn till dusk, repairing the barn roof. Whatever raid Hayes spoke of, Onas could not have been part of it. "I haven't seen any Apaches," she said truthfully. "Just the snow and my livestock." Hayes's eyes narrowed. "That's not what we've heard, Miss Jones. Word is you've been harboring an Apache, one with ties to Victorio's warriors." "I don't know what you're talking about," Helena replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Search the property," Hayes ordered his men, ignoring her protest. "Barn, outbuildings, everything." Helena watched helplessly as the soldiers dispersed, moving with practiced efficiency. Where had Onas gone? Had he fled, or was he hiding somewhere on the property? Hayes remained before her, studying her with cold contempt. "You should know, Miss Jones, that aiding hostiles is a serious offense. Your brother's good name won't protect you." "I'm aware of the law, Lieutenant," Helena replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "But I've broken none." A shout came from one of the soldiers near the corral. "Tracks here, sir, leading toward the creek." Hayes's face hardened with triumph. "Fresh tracks?" "Yes, sir. 1 man, moving fast." Helena's heart sank. Onas must have deliberately left a trail, leading them away from the ranch, away from her. "Looks like your friend left in a hurry," Hayes said, smirking. "Mount up," he called to his men. "Follow those tracks." As the patrol regrouped and prepared to ride out, Hayes turned back to Helena. "This isn't over, Miss Jones. When we catch your Apache, he'll hang, and you might be standing right beside him." With that threat hanging in the air, he rode away, leading his men along the trail Onas had deliberately left. Helena stood watching until they disappeared from sight, fear and helplessness washing over her. Onas had sacrificed his safety for hers, drawing the patrol away from the ranch. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Helena moved through her chores mechanically, her mind fixed on Onas. Had the soldiers caught him? Was he hurt or worse? As evening approached with no sign of him, her fear deepened into despair. Night fell, bringing renewed snowfall. Helena sat by the window, a lamp burning low, watching the darkness for any sign of movement. The hours crept by, midnight came and went, and still she waited, refusing to abandon hope. It was well past midnight, when a soft knock at the door jolted her from half-sleep. She rushed to open it, relief flooding through her as Onas stumbled in, exhausted but alive. His clothing was wet with snow and torn in places, a shallow cut on his cheek, the only visible injury. "You're hurt," Helena whispered, helping him to a chair by the fire. "It is nothing," Onas assured her, though his voice was strained with fatigue. "I led them far into the hills, then doubled back through the stream to hide my trail. They will search for days before realizing I've returned." Helena busied herself heating water, gathering clean cloths and her small supply of medicinal herbs. "You risked your life," she said, as she gently cleaned the cut on his cheek. "You could have fled, gone to join your people." Onas caught her hand, his fingers warm against her skin despite his ordeal. "My place is here," he said simply. "With you." The words hung between them, honest and unadorned. Helena met his gaze, seeing in his eyes the same emotion that had been growing in her heart, an impossible, inevitable connection that defied the barriers between their worlds. "Onas," she whispered, his name a question and an answer all at once. He released her hand slowly, reluctantly. "You should rest," he said. "Tomorrow will bring new challenges." Helena nodded, understanding his caution, the respect that held him back. But as she helped him settle in the small room that had once been Richard's, she knew something fundamental had changed between them. The danger they faced had stripped away pretense, revealing a truth neither could deny any longer. That night, as the storm raged outside and Onas slept in the next room, Helena made a decision. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the storm having passed during the night. Helena rose early, finding Onas already awake, stoking the fire in the main room. They worked together preparing a simple breakfast, moving around each other with the easy familiarity of people who had found their rhythm. "We need to discuss what happens next," Helena said, as they sat at the table, steam rising from their coffee cups. "Lieutenant Hayes won't give up easily." Onas nodded, his face solemn. "No, and Blackwood will use this opportunity against you." "Against us," Helena corrected quietly. Something flickered in Onas's eyes, surprise followed by a warmth that made Helena's heart beat faster. "Yes, against us. I've been thinking," she continued, gathering her courage. "The ranch is becoming viable again, thanks to your help. But as long as you're here, the army will keep searching and Blackwood will keep spreading his poison in town." "I could leave," Onas offered, though his eyes betrayed his reluctance. "Draw them away permanently." Helena reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "That's not what I want," she said softly. "I've lost too much already to lose you, too." The simple honesty of her words hung in the air between them. Onas turned his hand, his calloused palm meeting hers, fingers intertwining. "What do you propose?" he asked, his voice deep with emotion. "We fight," Helena replied, a new determination in her eyes. "Not with rifles or violence, but with truth and the law. Sheriff Miller is a fair man. He knew my brother, respects his memory. If we can prove you weren't involved in the raid, that Hayes is pursuing a personal vendetta." Onas's expression was skeptical. The word of an Apache against an army officer. "My word, too," Helena insisted. "And we have evidence. You were here with me when the raid happened. The repairs we completed that day are proof." A ghost of a smile touched Onas's lips. "You have your brother's faith in justice." "And his stubbornness," Helena added with a small laugh. "Richard wouldn't run, and neither will we." They spent the morning developing their plan. Helena would ride into town, speak with Sheriff Miller, gather information about the raid and Hayes's accusations. Onas would remain at the ranch, continuing their work but staying out of sight. If soldiers returned, he would hide in the root cellar beneath the cabin, a space Richard had enlarged years ago as a precaution against both Apache raids and outlaws. As Helena prepared to leave, saddling Sirocco for the journey, Onas approached with something in his hand, a small leather pouch on a cord. "This belonged to your brother," he said, offering it to her. "A medicine bundle, for protection on the journey." Helena accepted it with trembling fingers, touched by the gesture. "He never mentioned this to me. It was a private thing between us," Onas explained. "When I saved his life during a flash flood in the canyon, he gave me his medal from the war. In return, I gave him this, symbols of our brotherhood." Helena slipped the cord around her neck, tucking the pouch beneath her shirt. "I'll return safely," she promised. Onas nodded, his hand briefly touching her cheek in a gesture so tender it nearly undid her. "I will be waiting." The ride to town was tense, Helena constantly scanning the horizon for patrols. The small settlement of Copper Springs appeared in the distance by mid-afternoon, a clutch of wooden buildings straddling the stage road, dominated by the general store, saloon, and sheriff's office. Helena drew curious stares as she rode down the main street, tying Sirocco outside the sheriff's office. It had been months since she'd come to town, and gossip traveled fast in such isolated communities. She held her head high, ignoring the whispers that followed her. Sheriff Miller looked up in surprise when she entered his office. "Miss Jones, didn't expect to see you in town so soon after my visit." "I need your help, Sheriff," Helena said without preamble. "Lieutenant Hayes is hunting an innocent man." Miller sighed, gesturing for her to take a seat. "Figured this was coming." Hayes was mighty pleased with himself when he rode through yesterday, claiming he'd nearly caught your Apache friend. "Onas had nothing to do with the raid Hayes is investigating," Helena stated firmly. "He was with me the entire day, repairing my barn roof. We have proof." The sheriff studied her face. "You're sure about that? Absolutely certain?" "I stake my brother's good name on it," Helena replied without hesitation. Miller's weathered face softened slightly. "That means something to me, Miss Jones. Your brother was a good man, better than most." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "But Hayes isn't just after any Apache. He's convinced your friend has been passing information to Victorio's band." "Based on what evidence?" Helena demanded. "None that I've seen," Miller admitted. "But he's got the Colonel's ear, and the Colonel's got pressure from territorial authorities to show results." He hesitated, then added, "There's something else you should know. Hayes met with Blackwood before heading out to your place, spent a good hour in private conversation at the saloon." A cold certainty settled in Helena's stomach. They're working together. Blackwood wants my land and Hayes wants an Apache scalp to advance his career. Miller didn't contradict her. "Could be. Blackwood's been making noise about dangerous savages being harbored by a defenseless woman. Is he playing on folks' fears?" "I am far from defenseless," Helena said, anger rising in her voice. "And Onas is no savage. He's a man of honor, more than I can say for either Blackwood or Hayes." "I believe you," Miller said gently, "but not everyone will. Times are changing, but not fast enough." He sighed, rubbing his grey stubbled chin. "What exactly are you asking of me, Miss Jones?" "Information about the raid," Helena replied. "Dates, locations, details that could prove Onas's innocence." Miller considered this. "The raid happened at the Peterson homestead, about 20 miles east of here. 3 men dead, Peterson himself, his son-in-law, and a hired hand. Women and children spared, which is unusual for a genuine Apache attack." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "Come to think of it, that's been the pattern with these recent raids. Military targets hit hard, but homesteaders just robbed of supplies, men killed only if they resist." "That sounds more like outlaws using Apache tactics to cover their tracks," Helena suggested. "Wouldn't be the first time," Miller agreed. "But proving it—" He shook his head. "Hayes won't listen to theories, especially from a woman defending an Apache." "Then we need evidence," Helena said firmly. "Would you be willing to investigate the raid site? Look for signs that might indicate whether it was truly Apaches or imposters." Miller hesitated, weighing his responsibilities. "I could ride out there, take a look. My jurisdiction technically ends at the county line, but Peterson was a friend." "Thank you, Sheriff," Helena said sincerely. As she rose to leave, Miller's expression grew grave. "One more thing, Miss Jones. Hayes has requested reinforcements from Fort Stanton. They'll be here within days, a full company with orders to sweep the territory for hostiles." His meaning was clear. Time was running out. Helena's return journey was faster, urgency driving her to push Sirocco harder than she would have liked. The sun was setting by the time she reached the ranch, painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson. She dismounted quickly, calling for Onas as she entered the yard. There was no answer. The ranch lay silent, too silent. Alarm rising in her throat, Helena rushed to the barn, then the cabin, finding both empty. Signs of a struggle were evident in the trampled snow near the corral, boot prints, drag marks, a dark stain that could only be blood. "No," Helena whispered, panic threatening to overwhelm her. "Onas!" A soft noise from the storage shed drew her attention. Moving cautiously, hand on her revolver, Helena approached. Inside she found Juan Morales, an elderly Mexican who occasionally helped with the cattle. He was slumped against a sack of feed, a crude bandage wrapped around his head. "Señorita Jones," he rasped, attempting to rise. "Gracias a Dios you have returned." "Juan, what happened? Where is Onas?" Helena knelt beside the injured man, examining his wound. "Soldiers came," Juan explained weakly. "Led by a man with eyes like ice. They demanded the Apache. When he was not found, they searched everything. I arrived with supplies from town, saw what was happening, tried to leave." He gestured to his injury. "One soldier hit me. I pretended to be more hurt, stayed very still. They thought me unconscious." "And Onas?" Helena pressed, dread coiling in her stomach. "He returned after they began searching. Could have escaped, but saw them mistreating me." Juan's eyes filled with respect. "He surrendered himself to save an old man's life." Helena closed her eyes briefly, pain and fear warring within her. It was exactly what Onas would do, sacrifice his freedom, perhaps his life, to protect another. "Where did they take him?" she asked, helping Juan to his feet. "To town. The lieutenant said they would hold him for questioning, then transfer him to the fort." Juan's expression was grim. "Señorita," he spoke of a hanging. Helena's determination hardened into resolve. "Not while I draw breath," she vowed. "Can you ride, Juan?" The old man straightened, pride overcoming pain. "See, I can ride." "Good. I need you to take a message to Sheriff Miller in town. Tell him Hayes has arrested Onas without cause, that we need his help immediately." She scribbled a note, pressing it into Juan's hand. "Then find Judge Harmon if he's in town. He was my father's friend. He'll listen." As Juan departed on his mule, Helena moved with swift purpose. She changed into fresh clothes, strapped on her brother's gun belt, and gathered supplies, food, water, blankets, and the small amount of money she kept hidden beneath a floorboard. Whatever happened next, she would be prepared. Night had fallen completely by the time she reached town for the second time that day. Copper Springs was alive with activity, unusual for a weekday evening. A crowd had gathered outside the jailhouse, their murmurs carrying through the cold air. Helena dismounted a short distance away, tethering Sirocco behind the general store before approaching on foot. The scene that greeted her made her blood run cold. A makeshift gallows had been erected in the street, hastily assembled but functional. Lieutenant Hayes stood addressing the crowd, his voice carrying clearly through the night. "Harboring a murderous savage, this Apache has been proven to have connections to Victorio's war party, responsible for the deaths of good men, women, and children throughout the territory." Murmurs of anger rippled through the assembled townspeople. Helena spotted Blackwood standing near Hayes, a satisfied smile on his face as he watched the lieutenant whip the crowd into a frenzy. "The Army has jurisdiction in matters of Indian hostilities," Hayes continued, "and military justice is swift. At dawn, this renegade will hang as an example to any who would aid our enemies." Helena pushed her way through the crowd, searching for Sheriff Miller. She found him standing on the jailhouse steps, his expression troubled as he observed the proceedings. "Sheriff," she said urgently, "this is madness. They can't hang a man without a proper trial." Miller looked at her grimly. "I've sent for Judge Harmon, but he's out at the Anderson Ranch until tomorrow. I've tried to reason with Hayes, told him this is my jurisdiction, but—" He gestured helplessly at the soldiers flanking the jailhouse. "He's got 20 armed men backing his play, and most of the town supporting him after that speech about the Peterson massacre." "It's all lies," Helena insisted. "Juan told me what happened. Onas surrendered himself to prevent violence. Does that sound like a murderous savage to you?" "No," Miller agreed quietly. "It sounds like a good man making a bad choice." He studied her face. "You care for him deeply, don't you?" Helena met his gaze steadily. "Yes. And I won't let him die for a crime he didn't commit." The sheriff sighed, conflict evident in his weathered face. Then, decision made, he drew her aside into the shadows between buildings. "Listen carefully," he said in a low voice. "Hayes has Onas in the back cell. 2 guards inside, 4 more patrolling outside. They'll be expecting a rescue attempt from his Apache friends, not from a woman." He pressed something cold and metal into her hand, a key. "This opens the rear entrance. I'll create a distraction in about 15 minutes. Draw the outside guards to the front. The rest is up to you." Helena stared at him in surprise. "Why are you helping us?" Miller's expression softened. "Your brother saved my life at Shiloh, carried me 3 miles to a field hospital with a bullet in his own leg. Said it was what any decent man would do." He nodded toward the jailhouse. "This is what any decent man would do." Armed with the key and Miller's instructions, Helena circled behind the buildings, working her way toward the rear of the jailhouse. True to his word, a commotion erupted at the front of the building. Shouts, the sound of breaking glass, Miller's voice rising above the din about drunken cowboys causing trouble at the saloon. The rear entrance was unguarded when Helena reached it. The key turned smoothly in the lock, allowing her to slip inside the dimly lit corridor. She could hear voices from the front office, the remaining guards, distracted but still present. Moving silently, she approached the cell area. Onas sat motionless on a narrow cot, head bowed, wrists shackled before him. Despite his captivity, there was a quiet dignity in his posture, a stillness that spoke of inner strength rather than defeat. He looked up as Helena appeared, surprise and then alarm crossing his features. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, rising to his feet. "Neither should you," Helena replied softly, examining the cell door. This would be the difficult part. Miller's key wouldn't open the cells themselves. As if reading her thoughts, Onas nodded toward a sleeping guard slumped in a chair nearby, keys dangling from his belt. Helena moved silently toward him, heart pounding in her chest. Just as her fingers closed around the keys, the guard stirred, eyes opening blearily. "What the—" he began, reaching for his pistol. In one fluid motion, Helena grabbed the water pitcher from a nearby table and brought it down on the guard's head. He slumped forward, unconscious, but alive. "I'm sorry," she murmured, retrieving the keys and hurrying back to Onas's cell. The lock clicked open, and Onas stepped out, his eyes never leaving her face. "You risk everything," he said softly, a question in his words. "Yes," Helena answered simply, working on his shackles with trembling hands. "As you did for me." The restraints fell away, and Onas rubbed his wrists, wincing slightly. Helena noticed fresh bruising on his face, a cut above his eye that hadn't been there when she left. "Hayes," Onas explained, seeing her concern. "He was displeased with my silence." Anger flared in Helena, but there was no time for it now. "We need to go," she urged. "Sheriff Miller can't keep them distracted forever." They moved swiftly through the corridor toward the rear exit. Just as they reached it, voices approached from outside, soldiers returning to their posts. Helena and Onas pressed against the wall on either side of the door, exchanging a silent glance of understanding. When the door opened, Onas moved with the fluid grace of a warrior. The first soldier had no time to shout before Onas's hand clamped over his mouth, dragging him inside. The second reached for his weapon, but Helena was quicker, bringing the butt of her revolver down on his head. Both men were quickly bound and gagged with strips torn from their own shirts. Outside, the night had grown colder, the moon occasionally visible through scudding clouds. Helena led the way through the shadows, toward where she had left Sirocco, Onas moving silently beside her. They had almost reached the horse when a figure stepped from the darkness, blocking their path. Emmett Blackwood stood before them, a shotgun cradled in his arms. "Well, well," he drawled, a cold smile spreading across his face. "Hayes said you might try something foolish, Miss Jones. Didn't quite believe a proper Boston-educated lady would risk her neck for a savage." His eyes flicked to Onas. "Guess he underestimated whatever spell this one's cast on you." Helena raised her revolver. "Step aside, Blackwood. This doesn't concern you." "Oh, but it does." Blackwood's smile widened. "See, Hayes and I have an understanding. He gets his Apache scalp, I get your ranch. Nice and legal once you're convicted of aiding a murderer and army deserter." "You conspired to frame an innocent man," Helena accused, pieces falling into place. "The raid on the Peterson place, was that your doing too?" Blackwood's expression hardened. "That's a dangerous accusation, Miss Jones. Folks around here know me as a respectable businessman." His grip on the shotgun tightened. "Now, we're going to walk nice and quiet back to the jailhouse. You'll both get fair trials. Well, as fair as an Indian and an Indian lover can expect these days." Onas had remained utterly still during this exchange, but Helena sensed the coiled tension in him, ready to spring. She caught his eye briefly, a silent communication passing between them. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Blackwood," she said, deliberately drawing the man's attention, "and neither is he." As Blackwood's focus shifted fully to Helena, Onas moved, a blur of motion that caught the rancher completely off guard. The shotgun discharged harmlessly into the air as Onas tackled him, both men crashing to the ground in a tangle of limbs. They rolled, grappling for control, Blackwood's greater weight against Onas's quicker reflexes. Helena circled them, gun ready, unable to get a clear shot as they struggled. Blackwood landed a heavy blow to Onas's injured ribs, drawing a grunt of pain. In response, Onas drove his knee upward, connecting with Blackwood's stomach and momentarily gaining the advantage. The fight was brief, but vicious. When it ended, Onas stood breathing hard, Blackwood unconscious at his feet. A cut had reopened above Onas's eye, blood trickling down his face, but his eyes were clear and focused as he looked at Helena. "We must hurry," he said simply. "Others will have heard the shot." Indeed, shouts were already rising from the direction of the jailhouse. Helena helped Onas onto Sirocco, then mounted behind him, wrapping one arm around his waist while keeping her revolver ready in the other. They rode hard, leaving Copper Springs behind, the sounds of pursuit fading into the night. They didn't speak until they had put several miles between themselves and the town. Only then did Helena guide Sirocco off the main trail, following a deer path that wound through dense underbrush toward a small creek. "We can't return to the ranch," she said as they dismounted to rest the horse. "It's the first place they'll look." Onas nodded, wincing slightly as he stretched his bruised ribs. "There is a place in the mountains, a cave my people use during hunts. It is well hidden with water nearby." Helena hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Did you know about Blackwood's involvement in the raids?" "I suspected," Onas admitted. "There have been stories among my people, white men dressed as Apache using our weapons, speaking a few words of our language to deceive witnesses." He met her gaze steadily. "I did not want to bring more trouble to your door without proof." Helena touched his face gently, fingers tracing the bruise forming on his cheekbone. "You've brought nothing but honor to my door, Onas." Something shifted in his eyes. A warmth, a certainty that matched what Helena felt in her own heart. Slowly giving her time to withdraw if she wished, Onas leaned forward. Their lips met in a kiss that was both gentle and fierce, tender and passionate, a culmination of all they had endured together and all they might yet face. When they finally parted, Helena rested her forehead against his. "What happens now?" she whispered. "Now we find proof," Onas replied, his hand cradling the back of her neck. "Proof that Blackwood and Hayes are behind the raids, that they framed my people for their crimes. And then," a smile touched Onas's lips, rare and beautiful in its honesty, "and then we build a life, Helena Jones, together, if that is what you wish." "It is," she said simply, "more than anything." They rested until dawn, huddled together against the cold, sharing warmth and whispered plans. As the first light broke over the eastern mountains, they mounted Sirocco once more, heading deeper into the wilderness, not in flight, but in pursuit of justice and a future that, against all odds, now seemed possible. The cave Onas spoke of proved to be an ideal sanctuary, hidden behind a waterfall, accessible only by a narrow ledge that would be invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. Inside, it was surprisingly warm and dry, with evidence of previous use by Onas's people. A stone fire ring, a few woven mats, dried herbs hanging from a natural shelf in the rock wall. They spent 3 days regrouping, tending to their injuries, and formulating a plan. Helena worried about the ranch, about Juan and the livestock, but knew returning would only lead to their capture. Instead, they focused on gathering evidence. Onas led Helena to the site of the Peterson massacre, where they discovered what Sheriff Miller had begun to suspect, signs that the attackers had only been disguised as Apaches, boot prints rather than moccasins, cartridge casings from Army-issue rifles, a dropped bandana with Blackwood's ranch insignia stitched into the corner. From there, they tracked the raiders to a hidden canyon where they found a camp, clearly used by white men, with supplies bearing the Blackwood brand and letters from Hayes detailing payment for services rendered in the territorial interest. It was the proof they needed. Armed with this evidence, they made contact with Sheriff Miller through Juan, who had faithfully maintained the ranch in their absence. The sheriff brought Judge Harmon to the neutral meeting place, a line shack on the border of Jones and Anderson land. "This is damning stuff," Judge Harmon said, examining the documents. "Enough to warrant arrests, certainly, but Hayes has military backing, and Blackwood has friends in the territorial government." "We have the truth," Helena insisted. "And witnesses. Juan saw Hayes's men attack Onas without provocation, and the Peterson widow told Sheriff Miller she thought the raiders didn't move like Apaches." Judge Harmon nodded thoughtfully. "It might be enough, especially with my old friend Colonel Madison taking command at Fort Stanton next week. He's no friend to corrupt officers." He looked between Helena and Onas, his expression softening. "You two have shown remarkable courage. Your brother would be proud, Miss Jones." "What happens now?" Helena asked. "Now I issue warrants for Hayes and Blackwood," the judge replied. "Sheriff Miller will execute them, with support from Madison's men once they arrive." "And Onas?" Helena pressed, her hand finding his. "Will he be safe?" Judge Harmon's gaze lingered on their clasped hands. "The territory is changing, Miss Jones. Slowly, perhaps too slowly for some, but changing nonetheless. With Hayes exposed as corrupt and the real raiders brought to justice, your friend's name will be cleared." A small smile touched his weathered face. "As for what comes after, that's between you two." 1 week later, Helena stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching as Sheriff Miller rode away. He had come bearing news, Lieutenant Hayes was under arrest, facing court-martial for corruption and false imprisonment. Blackwood had attempted to flee, but was captured crossing into Mexico. Evidence had been uncovered linking them both to not only the Peterson massacre, but 3 other raids attributed to Apaches. Onas came to stand beside her, his shoulder brushing hers as they watched the sheriff disappear over the horizon. "It is over," he said quietly. Helena turned to him, drinking in the sight of him standing freely on their land, for it was theirs now, in every way that mattered. "No," she corrected gently, "it's just beginning." The winter passed, the ranch flourishing under their joint care. Spring brought new calves, green shoots pushing through the soil, and a letter from Judge Harmon informing them that Hayes had been convicted, Blackwood sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison. With justice served, Helena and Onas faced their final challenge, the reaction of the community to their deepening relationship. Some turned away, unable to accept the bond between a white woman and an Apache warrior. Others, like Sheriff Miller and Juan's family, stood by them, recognizing the strength of character that had brought them together. On a perfect summer day, beneath the ancient cottonwood, where Richard had once taught Onas to read English poetry, they spoke vows of their own creation, a blend of Apache tradition and frontier practicality. Sheriff Miller witnessed it, along with Juan and his wife, and 3 representatives from Onas's tribe who had come to honor the union. "Your brother once told me that borders exist only in men's minds," Onas said that evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the New Mexico sky in impossible colors. He believed that one day people would learn to see beyond them. Helena leaned against him, savoring the solid strength of his presence. "Richard always was ahead of his time, as is his sister," Onas replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. As darkness fell over the ranch, their ranch, Helena thought of all they had endured to reach this moment. The loss, the danger, the prejudice that still existed beyond their boundaries. But here, in this place, they had created something rare and precious, a home where 2 worlds met in harmony, where love had proven stronger than hatred, where a promise made to a dying man had blossomed into a future neither could have imagined alone. "Your brother saved my life," Onas had said on that first day months ago. What neither of them had known then was how completely they would save each other, not just from physical danger, but from the isolation of grief, the barriers of prejudice, the fear of reaching across boundaries. In a land where survival often depended on mistrust, they had chosen trust instead. And in that choice, they had found not just survival, but life in its fullest measure. The end. Dear listener, as the dust settles on our tale of courage in the New Mexico territory, I speak directly to you, not as a distant voice, but as a friend sitting beside you in the gentle evening light. You, with your decades of living, loving, and sometimes stumbling, have gathered a treasure more precious than any gold rush fortune, wisdom earned through experience. Like Helena, perhaps you've carried burdens of regret, choices made, or opportunities missed that still whisper in quiet moments. Tonight I invite you to set down that weight. The past cannot be rewritten, but it need not define your tomorrow. You did the best you could with what you knew then. That is enough. Remember how Onas refused to be defined by others' prejudice. In the same way, refuse to be defined by your own harshest judgments of yourself. The missteps that loom so large in your memory are merely threads in the rich tapestry of a life fully lived. When you lay your head down tonight, breathe deeply and release the grip of should-haves and if-onlys. Instead, wrap yourself in the simple truth that this present moment, this breath, this heartbeat, is your most precious possession. It is here, now, that joy waits to be discovered, not in yesterday's shadows or tomorrow's uncertainties. Have you noticed how both Helena and Onas found healing, not through dwelling on past wounds, but by taking one brave step forward each day? Their path to happiness wasn't paved with perfection, but with forgiveness, of others and themselves. This same path lies open before you. If relationships remain unhealed in your life, remember it's never too late to speak words of reconciliation or to hear them. The simple act of saying, "I'm sorry" or "I forgive you," can break chains that have bound hearts for decades. As you drift towards sleep, know this: your heart deserves to beat freely, unburdened by old regrets and ancient hurts. Like the wild horses of the western plains, your spirit was made for freedom, not to be harnessed to past mistakes or sorrows. Tomorrow may you rise with the lightness of one who knows their value isn't measured by flawless performance, but by the courage to begin again, as many times as life requires. Rest well, dear friend. Your story continues, and its most beautiful chapters may still be unwritten, with heartfelt appreciation for your journey. Wild West Whispers team, thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this journey. We hope Helena and Onas' story brought warmth to your heart, strength to your soul, and a sense of peace to your evening. If you enjoyed this story, we kindly invite you to subscribe to our channel, leave a comment, click like, and share it with someone special. Every bit of support means the world to us and keeps us deeply motivated to keep telling these emotional tales of love, redemption, and unexpected twists. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for supporting Wild West Whispers. And remember, at the end of this video you'll see a suggestion for another story from our channel. Click it and let yourself be surprised by another unforgettable ride through the Wild West.